All right, so today we're tackling one of the biggest, most ambitious stories out there right now. Indonesia's massive, high-stakes gamble to build a totally green, climate-proof economy.
And that question up there, it's not just some abstract hypothetical. For Indonesia, this is a real, live, existential question. I mean, the country is staring down a massive threat. But here's the thing. It's also forging a path forward that could completely change its future.
Okay, to really get a handle on this challenge, you have to start with the sheer scale of the place. We're talking about more than 17,500 islands. That's not a typo. And with all those islands comes over 81,000 kilometers of coastline. It's just immense. And that very geography makes it incredibly vulnerable.
So let's get into it. Just how serious is this risk? Well, the data, it paints a really stark picture of a country facing some major disruption.
If we continue down a high emissions path, which is what this chart shows, Indonesia is looking at a much hotter future. And no, we're not just talking about needing more air conditioning or, warmer days at the beach. A temperature rise like this, it threatens everything. We're talking agriculture, public health, the works.
And all that heat, it comes with a staggering price tag. The Asian Development Bank did the math, and they estimate that by the end of the century, climate change could shave off anywhere from 2.5% to a whopping 7% of Indonesia's GDP. For a nation that's growing as fast as it is, losing that much economic output, well, it's nothing short of a potential catastrophe.
But those big economic numbers, they don't even tell the full story. As the ADB points out, and this is the crucial part, the real weight of this burden, it falls on the poorest communities. The people who are most vulnerable, the ones with the fewest resources to adapt when their crops fail or the seas start to rise. So, faced with this looming crisis, what's the plan? Well, Indonesia isn't just sitting back and waiting for the worst to happen. Nope, it's making a massive strategic pivot. It's going all in on something called the green economy.
Okay, so what is a green economy anyway? It sounds nice, but what does it actually mean? Well, according to the UN, it's a model that thinks about everything at once. It's about having low carbon emissions, sure. It's about using resources way more efficiently. But, and this is so important, it also has to be socially inclusive. It's got to work for everyone. It's a blueprint for a genuinely sustainable future. And this whole approach, it really stands on three main pillars. First, you've got the environmental side, protecting Indonesia's absolutely incredible ecosystems and cutting emissions. Then, there's the economic pillar, using this shift to drive innovation and create new, sustainable ways to grow. And finally, the social pillar, making sure this transition actually improves people's lives and that nobody gets left behind.
All right, so a big idea is one thing, but how do you actually turn it into reality on the ground? Well, it all comes down to concrete policies and really ambitious plans, especially when you look at the energy sector, which is absolutely key to all of this.
And you can really see how this is ramped up over time. This timeline tells a story of ambition that's just been growing and growing. From its first big climate pledge back in 2016, all the way to the huge Just Energy Transition Partnership, the JETP, that was announced in 2022. Indonesia has been steadily raising the bar for itself on the global stage.
And that JETP, it's a potential game changer. Seriously. A central goal is right here on this chart, getting at least 34% of all electricity from renewables by 2030. Now, for a country that has been so heavily reliant on coal for so long, that is a massive, monumental shift.
But it's not just about energy. There's another huge target called FOLU Net Sink 2030. Okay, so FOLU stands for Forestry and Other Land Use. The big idea here is to get that whole sector, which has historically been a massive source of emissions because of deforestation, to a point where it's actually absorbing more carbon than it releases by 2030. This is a linchpin of their entire climate strategy.
Right. A transformation this huge, well, you know what that means. It comes with a truly massive price tag. So the billion-dollar question, or rather the multi-billion-dollar question, is where is all that money going to come from? Yeah, just let that number sink in for a second. To hit its climate goals by 2030, Indonesia needs something in the ballpark of $285 billion US. That number right there, it just lays bare the enormous gap between their ambitions and the money they have in the public piggy bank.
And this is where you see the central tension, the real push and pull in the country's finances. Check this out. Between 2015 and 2020, the government actually spent more of its budget on fossil fuel subsidies, about 9%, than it did on climate action, which only got around 6%. It's such a clear example of the incredibly tough political and economic trade-offs they're dealing with.
So, to try and close that massive funding gap, Indonesia is getting really creative with its financial toolkit. They're not just relying on one thing. They're using a mix of green bonds and the Sharia-compliant bonds called sukuk. They're using blended finance, which is basically using public money to make projects safer for private investors. And of course, they're leaning on big international partnerships to bring in the capital they so desperately need.
Okay, but a green transition, it can't just be about technology and finance. It will absolutely fail if it leaves people behind. And that brings us to this incredibly important idea of a just transition. The whole point is to make sure this massive economic shift is fair and equitable for every single person involved.
And this leads us to maybe the toughest, most human question in this entire story. What about all the people, the families, the communities whose jobs are tied to the fossil fuel industry? For a region that depends on coal mining for everything, a green transition can sound a lot like a threat to your entire way of life.
And this table here, it really lays out that complicated reality. There are no easy answers. Everybody involved faces a trade-off. Coal-dependent communities, yeah, they might get new jobs in renewables down the line, but first, they face the very real, very immediate loss of jobs and income. And for businesses, they see huge opportunities in green tech, but they also risk having their coal plants and mines become completely worthless, what they call stranded assets.
And this right here, this quote gets to the absolute heart of what a just transition is all about. It can't be something handed down from on high. It has to be built from the ground up. It means, like it says here, having deep, ongoing involvement from the communities themselves, at every single step of the way, from the initial planning all the way to what happens long after a plant or a mine is shut down.
So here's the ultimate takeaway. For Indonesia, this isn't just an environmental policy. It's not just a nice to have. They're framing this green pivot as their core economic strategy for the future. It's an investment in long-term growth, in creating new kinds of jobs, and in building a more resilient nation for generations to come.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, it's pretty clear the real question isn't whether Indonesia should try to build this new green economy. The real question is how. How on earth do you manage what is, without a doubt, one of the most complex and difficult national transformations in modern history? It is a huge green gamble, and you can be sure the entire world is watching to see how it plays out.